Some years ago, the ocean had reclaimed much of the Florida Keys, leaving only skeletal remnants of what had once been sun-drenched beaches and thriving island towns. Now, jagged concrete pillars jutted from the waves like broken bones, and rusting rooftops peeked out of the water, a ghostly testament to humanity's failure to protect its shores. Dr. Alice Kincaid gazed out the reinforced viewing window of Horizon Deep-Sea Station, eyes filled with a mix of scientific intrigue and lingering sadness. Once, her father had told her tales of sparkling coastlines and colorful reefs teeming with life. Now, the reefs were deeper, the coasts abandoned. And yet, where many saw only devastation, Alice saw a frontier of endless mysteries. She stood in the observation deck, listening to the hum of the station's submersible bay. Every few seconds, lights flickered through the reinforced glass as robotic drones zipped past, scanning the ocean floor for anomalies. The air smelled faintly of metal and disinfectant, a constant reminder that Horizon Deep-Sea Station was as much a laboratory as it was a home. Despite the station's claustrophobic corridors and persistent mechanical hum, it was the closest thing to family Alice had now. Each day, she wore the pain of her father's loss like a half-healed bruise, tender but not incapacitating. His disappearance years ago, during a deep-sea expedition gone wrong, had forged her resolve to uncover whatever secrets the ocean held. At her side, a display table showed the latest sonar readings from a routine survey dive earlier that morning. The readings were odd. Unusual metallic signatures, far larger than any known shipwreck, had registered on the scanners at the very edge of the station's operational radius. After triple-checking for equipment malfunctions, she realized the data was genuine. It spoke of something massive lurking in the cold, dark recesses of the sea. She traced the outlines on the screen with her fingertip, adrenaline coiling through her veins. If this was real, it could be the defining discovery of her career, perhaps of the century. As she stood there, half mesmerized by the data, a soft chime alerted her to an incoming call. She tapped a button and the screen flickered to life, revealing the concerned face of Dr. Marcus Ng, her colleague and close friend. "Please tell me you're seeing these readings," Marcus said, his voice hushed yet urgent. "I've run them through every calibration check I can think of. They're authentic." Alice nodded, eyes still locked on the spectral shapes. "If that cluster is natural, I'd be shocked. It's too organized." She paused, then added quietly, "Too big to be a relic from any war we know about." Marcus exhaled, pushing a lock of wet hair off his forehead. "Command wants answers, but we can't rush into this. Some people think it might be an old nuclear submarine graveyard or a lost experimental fleet. A few are already spouting wild conspiracy theories." Alice half smiled. "Since when did we ever rule out conspiracies around here?" she teased, recalling the rumors that circulated about secret government projects. "I'm going to assemble a team for a closer look." "If you do, be careful," he warned. "The deeper you go, the less we understand about what's down there." That night, as lightning flickered across the distant horizon, Alice couldn't shake the sensation that the ocean was holding its breath. Something about the data spoke of long-buried histories, something hidden and potentially dangerous. Still, her curiosity burned brighter than her apprehension. She reviewed the preliminary exploration plans and mapped out a safe approach. The station's submersible, the Odyssey, was prepped for a morning dive. Before turning in, she stood once more at the observation deck, gazing into the moonlit waves that stretched endlessly into shadow. She thought of her father's last log entry, his excited remark about something spectacular he had found. Standing there in the subdued glow of the station lights, she silently promised him she would see this through, no matter what waited in the uncharted depths. Little did she know, fate was already in motion. Far above the station, something else cut through the atmosphere, a pinpoint of silver in the sky, nearly invisible against the stars. Its path drew it inexorably toward the Florida Straits, and toward the very same hidden anomaly that had captured Alice's imagination. The stage was set for discoveries beyond anything she had ever dreamed, and dangers more profound than she could possibly imagine. The Odyssey glided through the water like a silent sentinel, its lights cutting slim beams through the endless blue-black. It was early morning, but here, hundreds of meters below the surface, dawn had no meaning. Dr. Alice Kincaid sat at the submersible's helm, scanning the digital readouts pulsing across her console. Next to her, Dr. Marcus Ing double-checked the sonar returns. His brow was furrowed in concentration, and the tension in his posture was palpable. Outside, the undersea world slept in stillness. Isolated schools of fish flitted beyond the Odyssey's floodlights, their silver shapes dissolving the moment the beams slipped away. Giant kelp swayed in unseen currents, weaving through the shadows like living curtains. And, looming at the farthest edge of the submersible's detection, that same baffling signature, a massive cluster of steel or metal alloy. If that was indeed what it was, hovered at the threshold of their sensors. Alice spared a glance over her shoulder at the rest of the dive team. Jackson Vu, a quiet but formidable engineer, hovered at the systems panel, recalibrating the sub's thrusters every time they encountered a crosscurrent. Claudia Ramirez, fresh from the lunar mining colonies, balanced her excitement with an unyielding focus. She had joined Horizon Station only 3 months ago, yet her achievements in deep-pressure engineering had already made a name for her in marine science circles. Like the rest of them, she could sense there was more to this dive than mere data collection. 80 meters until we hit the drop-off, Marcus announced in a low tone. His gaze flicked between screens, verifying that the bizarre readings still beckoned. Alice nodded. Maintain current depth. We'll adjust once we see the ridgeline. Her heart thudded a little faster. She'd been down this particular trench countless times, mapping ecosystems, studying the aftereffects of rising sea levels, but never had the scans revealed anything remotely like what they were picking up now. A structure or multiple structures. Possibly ancient. Possibly new. Possibly not even human. The thought was enough to send a thrill of excitement through her, although she tried to remain calm and scientific. At last, the Odyssey came upon the ledge that spilled over into the yawning chasm below. The sub's spotlights swept across sheer rock walls and twisted coral formations before resting on the darkness beyond. Marcus boosted the sonar. Pale shapes began to materialize on screen. Monolithic outlines gathered in a seemingly purposeful arrangement. Jackson let out a low whistle. That's not just one massive wreck, he observed, his voice trembling with awe. It looks like multiple vessels lined up, like a formation. Alice's hand tightened on the control yoke. She'd suspected something enormous, but the reality was more unsettling and more exhilarating than she'd imagined. Mark each distinct silhouette, she ordered quietly. Let's see if we can get an approximate count. From the overhead speaker crackled the calm voice of Horizon Station's watch officer, Lieutenant Rhea Samuels. Odyssey, we show a faint spike of unrecognized radio waves in your vicinity. Are you transmitting anything unusual? Alice exchanged a look with Marcus. He shook his head, fingers dancing across the sub's interface. Negative, station, Alice replied. We're receiving normal broadband from you, but nothing else on our end. Yet even as she spoke, the Odyssey's monitors spiked with interference. Sudden bursts of static danced over the readouts. A faint, warbling sound filled the cabin, as though the submersible sensors were trying to interpret a foreign language. For a moment, no one breathed. This can't be a glitch, Marcus whispered, tapping at the screen in frustration. Whatever it is, it's deliberate. It's like something scanning us, Claudia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alice felt her stomach drop. If these vessels, whatever they were, remained operational on any level, then their technology might still be active. She glanced at the hazy shapes on the sonar, half lost in the endless black. Did something down there know they were here? Before she could consider the implications, a sharp ping echoed through the sub, followed by another wave of static that made the Odyssey's lights flicker. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the interference subsided, leaving only the steady hum of the sub's engines and the hiss of pressurized air. A tense stillness fell over the interior. Even the occasional beep from the sonar seemed amplified in the hush. Alice's mind raced, but she forced herself to remain methodical. Jackson, run a diagnostic on our sensor suite. Marcus, note the exact frequency of the interference. Claudia, keep eyes on external cameras. Whatever just happened, we need to stay calm. They resumed a slow descent, carefully maneuvering closer to the pale outlines. As they inched forward, the shapes began to resolve into more defined forms. Hulls, decks, towering structures that gleamed faintly in the sub's floodlights. metal tinted by centuries of aquatic corrosion, but not nearly as much as one would expect from sunken relics. They looked eerily intact, almost as if they were waiting. A fleet, Alice murmured. It looks like an entire fleet, anchored here under the ocean floor. Jackson's eyes were glued to his readouts. And it's giving off minimal power signatures. That's probably what we picked up on station scans. Marcus's voice was subdued. I've studied modern battleship wrecks before. They corrode, break apart, or sink partially into the sediment. These ships look untouched, preserved. Alice could almost feel her pulse echoing in her ears. Could it be that these warships hailed from a lost era of human history, or something else entirely? She remembered her father's final journal entry, the fervent words scrawled across the page about technology beyond comprehension. Could this be what he had stumbled upon? She brought the Odyssey in for a closer look at the nearest vessel. Through the sub's thick viewport, she glimpsed a sleek metal curve dotted with an unfamiliar script, worn symbols that glowed faintly in the watery gloom. A silent gasp escaped her lips. Without warning, the quiet was shattered by an explosive burst of turbulence. The sub lurched, sending everyone sprawling. Alarm klaxons wailed. Alice fought with the controls as unseen currents battered the Odyssey. A moment later, the external cameras picked up movement. A blinding, cone-shaped beam sweeping across the ocean floor, searching, hunting. Oh God, Claudia breathed. What is that? Before any of them could answer, a second craft slid into view on the sub's monitors. Smooth, angular, and undoubtedly not human-made. It cut through the water with terrifying grace. Its exterior shimmered with an otherworldly sheen. Alice's breath came short. Everyone, hold your positions. Quiet. She killed the sub's external lights, plunging them into near darkness. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the console screens. They watched in horrified fascination as the alien craft circled the hidden ships, like a caretaker returning to a forgotten arsenal. Time seemed to slow. The alien craft's searchlights swept in a wide arc, inches away from catching the Odyssey's darkened hull in its beam. Alice held her breath, praying the sub's minimal heat signature and dimmed systems would keep them undetected. At last, the craft drifted off, its radiant beam disappearing into the black waters. Yet no one aboard the Odyssey breathed a sigh of relief. They had come seeking answers. Instead, they discovered a secret that was no longer dormant. Someone, or something, else was already here, and it appeared they were awakening the same mystery that gripped Alice's imagination. She glanced at her team, each face shining with fear and excitement. Then she engaged the Odyssey's thrusters, quietly guiding it back towards safer depths. They had learned enough for one day, enough to know the ocean was no longer the final frontier. A new danger lurked in Earth's submerged shadows, and the question gnawing at Alice's mind was far more unsettling than any ruin or lost fleet. What would happen when the Watchers in the deep turned their full attention to humanity? Miles above the submerged warships, the Thralex scout vessel glided through Earth's atmosphere with near-ghostly silence. Its matte surface reflected no light, rendering the craft a dark silhouette against the dawn sky. At its helm stood Commander Tal Desim, tall and lithe by human standards, his skin a faintly iridescent gray. Where human eyes might betray emotion, Tal's gaze was calculated, cold. He was here for one reason: to find and secure the legendary fleet that his intelligence reports claimed lay hidden beneath Earth's oceans. The moment Tal's vessel breached the upper atmosphere, he began receiving data from the probe he'd sent underwater just hours before. Flickering holographic readouts shimmered in the air before him. The images confirmed the presence of large structures, undoubtedly vessels of an advanced design. Yet there was one curious anomaly in the probe's transmissions: a second silhouette, smaller but unmistakably moving through the same murky depths. The humans were already investigating. Tal regarded this with a thin curl of distaste. Early contact was never ideal. It complicated straightforward missions. But he had learned long ago that the unpredictability of lesser species was often more nuisance than threat. He turned to address his second-in-command, a broad-shouldered Thralex officer named Kosan Fel. The alien's angular features hardened with attention as Tal spoke in clipped, resonant tones. "Local inhabitants have discovered something they shouldn't," Tal said, gesturing to the hologram of the Odyssey's faint heat signature. They will likely attempt to learn more. We must ensure they do not interfere. Kosan nodded, the rigid plating at his temples catching ambient light. Commander, do we engage them directly or maintain stealth protocols? Tal's pale lips pressed into a thin line. For now, subtlety. Let them suspect, but not confirm. If they pose a threat to our objective, we will handle them accordingly. The scout vessel dove lower, almost kissing the ocean's surface. Ripples fanned out across the water as its engines engaged in undersea entry mode. Within the ship's corridors, squads of specialized Thralex subcraft were being prepped. Sleek, angular machines that mirrored their mothership's aesthetic, they were designed for quick strikes and covert scouting. Each bristled with scanning arrays and short-range weaponry capable of great precision in watery depths. Meanwhile, far below, in Horizon Deep Sea Station, Dr. Alice Kincaid sat in the main control room, flanked by Marcus Ing and Lieutenant Rhea Samuels. The tension was palpable. Less than an hour ago, Alice and her dive team had returned from their harrowing underwater encounter with an unknown craft. Evidence was overwhelming. This was no simple relic of bygone human wars. Something else had arrived. Lieutenant, do we have any sat feeds giving us a hint of what's happening on the surface? Alice asked, eyes flicking from screen to screen. Rhea pursed her lips. We picked up a high-altitude object descending rapidly. Satellite imaging is patchy thanks to the morning cloud cover, but we suspect it made a controlled drop somewhere off the coast. Marcus joined in. Whatever it was, it came in fast. Maybe a meteor, or... Alice shot him a glance. They were well beyond maybe at this point. Or something not of this earth, she finished quietly. A dull metallic clang echoed through the station's hull, followed by a flicker in the overhead lights. Alarms began to flash on the control room's monitors. Power fluctuation on the west corridor, Rhea stated, her voice clipped. Trying to stabilize. Alice stepped around to another console, scanning logs. That's near the external docking port for our submersibles. She paused, swallowing a rising tide of apprehension. If I didn't know better, I'd say we're being probed remotely. Some kind of infiltration. She expected Marcus or Rhea to argue, to tell her it was just a glitch. But the look in their eyes told her they believed it too. Shaken though they were, they had no choice but to face the reality. Something was testing their defenses, tasting the station's vulnerabilities. Above them, Commander Tal observed from his subcraft's cockpit as it slipped below the waves. The built-in scanning arrays relayed data that confirmed the station's location and structural layout. The humans had set up quite an operation here, more sophisticated than he'd expected for a species generally considered unremarkable on the galactic stage. Still, he reminded himself, even a cornered animal could be dangerous. At last, Tal's subcraft glided into a deeper channel, nearing the sunken fleet. Pale columns of refracted light drifted through the water, illuminating the massive ships that had drawn him to this backwater planet. They were relics from an era predating Thralex archives, rumored to harness destructive energies no known technology could rival. If Tal succeeded in activating even a fraction of their power, the Empire's hold on interstellar conflict would be unassailable. Commander, we've detected partial movement around the fleet, Kosan reported over the comm. Likely human exploration crafts. They have a station a few kilometers from here. Then we will keep them busy. Tal responded, ice in his tone. Scramble a small squad to create diversions. Sabotage their systems if possible. Ensure they do not approach the vessels until I complete my assessment. While Tal and his crew orchestrated the next phase of their mission, chaos brewed in Horizon Station. Alice and Marcus rushed to seal off vital compartments as short bursts of power outages swept through the structure. Technicians scrambled to reroute electricity, cursing the system malfunctions that materialized and vanished as if orchestrated by an unseen hand. Even as panic threatened to overtake the staff, Alice felt a strange determination boil up within her. She had seen the fleet, huge, unreal, and somehow still alive with potential. It was a discovery that could change humanity's understanding of both Earth's past and its future. But now another force had arrived, one whose capabilities were utterly unknown. If these aliens wanted control of that hidden armada, what were their intentions? In the flickering corridor light, Alice met Marcus's gaze. His jaw was set, equal parts fear and resolve. "We're not giving up on this," she said softly. "If they think they can just come here and take whatever they want, they're in for a fight." He gave a single nod. Together, then. Overhead, unholy thunder rumbled in the water as Tal's forces maneuvered into position. On deck after deck within Horizon Station, alarms screamed. And in the midst of it all, Earth's oldest secret, those ancient warships, hidden for centuries beneath the ocean's shifting currents, waited in silent anticipation. Both the humans and the Thralex were only beginning to realize the magnitude of what they had stumbled upon and the peril that would soon follow. A cacophony of alarms and sputtering lights made Horizon Deep Sea Station feel like a claustrophobic labyrinth. Doors hissed open and snapped shut in stuttering rhythms. Backup generators roared to life, only to flicker off when power rerouted to more critical areas. Shouts and hurried footsteps echoed through narrow passageways. It was as though the station itself were under siege, and in a sense, it was. Dr. Alice Kincaid raced along the metal walkway, her boots ringing out with each hurried step. Water dripped in thin rivulets from newly formed cracks in the ceiling, leaving slick puddles underfoot. The sabotage, subtle at first, had escalated into full-fledged infiltration. More than one console now displayed strange, scrolling symbols in an alien script, a mocking sign that the Thralex had begun working from within the station's systems. At her side, Dr. Marcusing hurried to keep pace. He clutched a handheld interface, eyes scanning lines of code in a desperate attempt to cut off whatever remote access the aliens were using. Despite his best efforts, the station's core computer remained locked in a wrestle for control. "Every time I think I've patched the breach, it morphs," he muttered under his breath. "It's like the system is fighting a virus that's rewriting itself in real time." Alice exchanged a worried glance with him. If these aliens could bend the station's operations to their will, they might seal bulkheads at will or flood entire compartments. If it came to that, the crew would be trapped. Her heart pounded at the thought. She had never imagined she might one day defend her own station against an extraterrestrial foe. They took a hard left, arriving at the station's small security hub, where Lieutenant Rhea Samuels stood with arms crossed over her chest. Sweat glistened on her brow despite the station's climate controls. A half-dozen monitors surrounded her, each showing different vantage points of the station's corridors and the swirling waters outside. "Any luck containing the breaches?" Alice asked, struggling to sound composed. Rhea's face remained grim. "Limited. We've sealed off the western docking bay, but there's a new infiltration point near the hydroponics lab. They're picking us apart, slowing us down, bit by bit." Rhea tapped a screen showing a black and white feed of the external hull, where alien subcraft skulked in the underwater gloom like sharks circling prey. The image seemed surreal, a half-dozen sleek shapes gliding silently, their hulls catching what little bioluminescent glow filtered through the ocean's depths. "They're not blasting us," Rhea continued, "which means they want something else. Maybe just to keep us from interfering with their main objective." At that moment, Jackson Vu burst into the security hub, panting. The wiry engineer had a deep cut above his eyebrow, and the left sleeve of his jumpsuit was torn. One of the maintenance corridors near the docking bay caved in. He managed between ragged breaths. "I got pinned by debris. There was water rushing in. Thought I was done for." Marcus rushed to him, quickly checking the wound. "We need to get you to medical." Jackson shook his head. "I'll live." More importantly, I saw one of their drones, some mechanical sphere the size of a beach ball. It was scanning everything, including me. His eyes darted to each face in the room. I swear, it looked like it was cataloging each detail. Alice absorbed the news in silence. A creeping realization took root in her mind. The aliens weren't merely sabotaging the station. They were collecting data. Did that mean the sunken fleet was more complex to harness than they'd expected? Or did they fear humanity might be stronger than they anticipated? She pressed a trembling hand to her temple. "We can't just sit here and watch them dissect us from within." "Rhea, are there any available submersibles left that haven't been compromised?" "Just two," Rhea replied, "in the eastern dock. We've reinforced their control systems with an isolated backup circuit to keep the aliens from hacking them." Alice looked to Marcus. "We need to get eyes on that fleet again. The more we know, the better we'll understand what the Thralex want. If they're having trouble activating the warships, maybe we can figure out why and use it to our advantage." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. I'll go with you. If we can retrieve more data, maybe we can disrupt the Thralex infiltration from the source. Rhea raised a brow. You realize leaving the station right now is an enormous risk. If you're cut off, we're cut off anyway, Alice said resolutely. We can't effectively defend ourselves if we're in the dark. With Rhea's reluctant approval, Alice and Marcus suited up for a dive. On their way to the eastern dock, they passed corridors littered with sparks and loose cables, glimpsed colleagues wrestling with failing consoles. The station's morale was buckling under the pressure. More than once, they saw half-formed alien glyphs flickering on screens, a taunting reminder of the Thralex's technological supremacy. Stepping into the dock staging area, they were greeted by Claudia Ramirez, who was already at work prepping the submersible Mirage. A swirl of tension and relief crossed her face when she saw them. Commander Tall's craft isn't the only one out there, she said, voice hushed. Our monitors picked up multiple readings along the trench. They're zeroing in on the largest of the sunken vessels. Alice boarded the Mirage, carefully inspecting the simplified, isolated controls that had been stripped of network connections. It wasn't as advanced as the Odyssey, but at least the aliens couldn't hack it. She settled into the pilot's seat, feeling her heart pound as the sub's systems hummed to life. Soon, the docking bay flooded with water, the overhead lights turning green to signal a good seal. Ready, Marcus said from the co-pilot station, voice reverberating through the comms. The Mirage slid smoothly out of the station, emerging into the sapphire gloom of the ocean. Through reinforced glass, they glimpsed the swirling forms of the Thralex subcraft, but none moved to intercept, at least not yet. Before long, the ocean floor dropped away beneath them, revealing the massive trench where the hidden warships had slumbered for centuries. Spots of luminescent algae glowed eerily along the ridges, tracing a ghostly path into the darkness. Alice's stomach twisted with anticipation as they edged closer to the coordinates. Somewhere, below and beyond, waited the alien fleet, and perhaps Tall himself, orchestrating a grand plan to reactivate the vessels. This is bigger than we imagined, Marcus whispered, scanning the sensors. You realize that if these warships come online, they might make nuclear submarines look like toys. Alice stared into the blackness, remembering her father's final words about something spectacular beneath the sea. Now it seemed that something was here, and the Thralex had come to claim it. She took a steadying breath, pushing down her fear. Then, faintly through the darkness, they saw it. The unmistakable outline of an enormous vessel, the lead ship of the ancient fleet. A momentary beam of alien light arced across its hull, revealing runic markings that glowed faintly with teal luminescence. In that fleeting glimpse, Alice felt a shiver course down her spine. The ship looked more organic than mechanical, as if the metal itself were alive. Marcus tapped frantically at his console, picking up an energy spike. The Thralex are trying to interface with the fleet's systems. Alice set her jaw. Then we need to move faster. Let's see if we can find what's powering these relics, and if there's a way to shut it down before it's too late. Behind them, a ripple disturbed the silent ocean, the elegant silhouette of a Thralex subcraft detached from the gloom. Its sensor arrays locked onto the Mirage, a predator marking its prey. Tensions between human resolve and alien ambition were about to reach a dangerous tipping point, and there was no telling who would survive the confrontation ahead. High above the churning sea, thunderheads gathered in menacing formations, transforming the sky into a swirl of black and bruised purple. Lightning ripped across the heavens in jagged forks, illuminating the horizon in split-second bursts of incandescent fury. The tropical storm that had been brewing for days finally unleashed its wrath, slamming the surface with torrential rain and waves that towered like dark mountains. From the vantage of Horizon Deep-Sea Station's external cameras, the ocean looked as if it wanted to consume everything in its path. Deep below, however, a different conflict raged. Dr. Alice Kincaid guided the submersible Mirage through the trench with tense determination, weaving between jagged rock outcroppings and the towering hulls of ancient warships. Seated beside her, Dr. Marcus Ng kept a wary eye on the sensor screens, where red blips signaled the movements of Thralex subcraft. Their sleek silhouettes flitted through the undersea gloom like sharks on the hunt. Energy readings are spiking, Marcus muttered, voice tight in the comms. Whatever the Thralex are doing, they're close to activating a major system in these vessels. Alice's knuckles whitened on the controls. We can't let that happen. If even one of these ships goes live, there's no telling what it could do to the station or the entire planet. As they rounded a towering column of coral-encrusted steel, an enormous funnel-like shape came into view. The lead ship's main cannon, or perhaps an energy projector of unknown design. Soft, ghostly lights ran along its length, flickering in and out like a dormant heartbeat struggling to revive. In the sub's floodlights, the metal appeared impossibly smooth. There was no sign of rust or barnacle growth as one would expect after centuries underwater. Marcus pointed to a cluster of faintly glowing symbols etched into the hull. That marking again. It almost looks like it's written in some hybrid of geometric patterns and flowing calligraphy. Not a language any of us recognized. Alice was about to respond when the sub's proximity alarms shrieked. A Thralex craft soared by, cutting so close that its wake rattled the mirage. In the flicker of their own lights, they glimpsed the alien pilot, tall, slender, with dark eyes that burned with cold intent. "They're hurting us," Alice realized, her voice low, trying to box us in against the hull. Sure enough, another Thralex subcraft zipped overhead, beams of light raking the ocean floor. The beam danced over the relic warship's plated surface, unveiling unfamiliar runes that flared in response. A grinding hum echoed through the water, deep and resonant, as if the ancient metal were shifting beneath layers of centuries-old silt. It was an ominous sign that the long-dormant vessel was waking. Alice jerked the controls, maneuvering the Mirage into the lee of a colossal fin-like protrusion on the warship's side. "If they corner us, we won't stand a chance." She flicked a switch on the comm panel. "Horizon Station, do you read? We need an immediate update. What's your status?" Static crackled, then Rhea Samuel's voice fought through the interference. "Station is holding on, but the storm topside is brutal. We've got intermittent flooding in multiple sections. The Thralex infiltration has slowed, probably because they've shifted focus to the trench. But we can't dispatch reinforcements to you in this weather, and half our systems are still compromised. You're on your own down there." Gritting her teeth, Alice nodded grimly. "Understood." Marcus turned his attention back to the readouts. "The energy signature is strongest in the vessel's midsection. If we can plant an EMP charge or disrupt their field, maybe we can stall them. But we only have what we brought from the station, makeshift devices at best." "We'll have to gamble," Alice replied, exhaling unsteadily. Cautiously, she guided the Mirage around the colossal warship's stern, hoping to avoid direct conflict while they located a suitable insertion point. Outside the sub's curved window, lightning lit the surface in violent strobe flashes, filtered down through the water in fleeting arcs of brightness. With each flicker, the silhouettes of multiple Thralex vessels snapped into view, like wraiths circling prey. A sudden beep from Marcus's console made them both jump. "Incoming sub behind us, closing fast." Alice didn't hesitate. She pressed the thruster pedal to its limit. The Mirage shot forward, skimming dangerously close to the warship's hull. She dodged twisted metal beams, coral formations, and rotting panels that jutted out like skeletal ribs. The Thralex sub matched every movement, unwavering in pursuit. "They're forcing us toward the warship's hangar bay," Marcus realized, eyes darting over the sonar feed. "If we get trapped inside, there might be no way out." Yet even as that dread took root, Alice considered another possibility. If they managed to slip inside the warship, perhaps they could disable the activation mechanism from within. It was a risk. What if they became stranded? But letting the Thralex reactivate this armada was a far graver threat. She angled the sub toward a large, circular opening on the warship's side. Lights flickered in her peripheral vision, alien glyphs scanning and responding. The Thralex sub let off a burst of plasma fire, brightening the water with sizzling energy. A near miss seared the Mirage's hull, causing the sub to shudder violently. Warning panels flashed red. "Now or never," Alice hissed. She pushed the throttle forward, plunging the sub through the circular aperture. At once, darkness enveloped them. This interior space was massive, but starved of any real light save for the luminous script weaving across the walls. Behind them, the Thralex sub hesitated. Alice suspected the alien pilot wasn't sure if the warship's internal defenses might still be active. For the moment, they had a small reprieve. The swirling gloom of the corridor was claustrophobic, eerie. Despite the frantic beating of her heart, Alice felt an odd sense of awe. She was inside the belly of something far older and more powerful than any human creation, with technology no one fully understood. Marcus unclipped a small, cylindrical device from his belt, a rudimentary EMP charge. Let's pray this does something. We need to find the ship's core. Alice nodded, guiding the Mirage deeper into the warship's corridors. Twisted passageways loomed like ancient cathedrals, silent except for the distant rumble of shifting metal. Far outside, the storm unleashed its fury on the surface, and Horizon Station fought to stay intact. But here, in the warship's hidden halls, a far more dangerous tempest was about to break. A showdown not just between humans and the Thralex, but between the promise of unimaginably destructive power and the fragile hope that it could be contained. An eerie calm settled in the sub's cockpit, broken only by the soft beep of sensors. With each beat of her heart, Alice knew they were drawing closer to the final confrontation that would decide not just their own fates, but the fate of Earth itself. Deep within the heart of the ancient warship, the Mirage drifted through a cavernous passageway. The submersible's floodlights illuminated walls etched with glowing symbols that pulsed in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like the heartbeat of a beast rousing from centuries of slumber. Dr. Alice Kincaid kept a firm grip on the controls, feeling each subtle shift of the ship's interior as if it were alive. Seated next to her, Dr. Marcus Ng clutched the makeshift EMP device, his fingers trembling not from cold, but from the crushing weight of what they were about to attempt. Behind them, the trailing presence of a Thralex subcraft loomed like a phantom. Although out of sight for the moment, the constant blips on the Mirage's sensor array told them their pursuer was never far away, stalking them through twisting corridors of metal and shadow. At last, a wider chamber opened up before them, a central gallery brimming with struts of curious architecture. Towering spires rose on either side, radiating pale light. It looked more like a sacred temple than the command center of a war machine. Yet the air was thick with suppressed power, making the water vibrate around the submersible's hull. "This must be it," Marcus whispered. He pointed to the largest spire, ringed with swirling glyphs that pulsed in shifting shades of blue. "If there's a core or something akin to an engine, it has to be here." Alice eased the Mirage closer, scanning for a docking point or any hint of an access panel. The lights of the sub caught on jagged edges. Part of the structure had collapsed, or perhaps never finished regenerating. Water swirled with drifting silt, glimmering in the beams. Her breath was shallow, her pulse racing. She knew they had to hurry, but caution would save their lives. Outside, a flicker of movement. The Thralex subcraft surged into view, its sensor arrays aimed squarely at the warship's heart. Suddenly, a bright lance of alien energy crackled through the water, striking the spire in a burst of light. The glyphs flared with brilliant intensity, the entire chamber vibrating violently. "They're trying to jumpstart the warship's systems," Alice said, voice shaking. "If they succeed, the station, no, the entire region, could be at risk." Marcus met her gaze, jaw set with determination. "We don't have time to do this carefully. Let's set the charge and pray it overloads whatever the Thralex are activating." Alice navigated the Mirage to a ledge adjacent to the spire. The sub's mechanical arm extended, gripping a small outcropping of twisted metal. Marcus readied the EMP device, a cylindrical contraption lined with makeshift wiring. One flick of a switch, and its internal capacitors would discharge a torrent of electromagnetic energy. Even if it didn't destroy the warship's core, it could disrupt the activation process and buy humanity a chance. Yet, as Marcus prepared to release the charge, something jarred the submersible. A violent impact spun the Mirage sideways, alarms blaring. Commander Tal DeCim's craft had arrived. Its sleek frame glowed with alien light, weaving gracefully to block any escape route. Through the water, they could see Tal's commanding figure at the helm, his features locked in grim concentration. Alice fought the controls, steadying the sub just enough to keep from crashing into the warship's interior walls. "Marcus, now!" she yelled, glancing back at the console. Marcus triggered the device and used the sub's arm to plant it against the spire's base. A faint blue spark arced between the charge and the warship's hull, hinting at the massive energy contained within. They had only seconds before it detonated. But Tal wasn't about to let them slip away. His sub darted in, angled for a direct collision with the Mirage. An unspoken threat: surrender or be destroyed. Alice's mind raced. If we try to outmaneuver them, we might not clear the blast radius in time, she hissed. We can't let the warship activate, Marcus said, voice taut. We'll have to risk it. Bracing herself, Alice slammed the thrusters. The Mirage hurtled forward, barely scraping past Tal's subcraft. The Thralex commander responded with a burst of plasma that seared across the Mirage's port side, sending sparks cascading inside the cabin. Warning lights flashed, and the sub jolted from the impact, but it managed to keep going. The spire behind them erupted in a corona of brilliant, swirling light. The EMP charge activated with a thunderous surge, sending shockwaves reverberating through the chamber. Tal's sub spun wildly, caught in the torrent of electromagnetic disruption. The glyphs etched across the warship's core flickered and died, entire sections of swirling script going dark in an instant. Alice felt the shockwave rattle the Mirage's hull, threatening to tear it apart. She wrestled the controls, fighting to keep them steady as the warship's interior began collapsing. Twisting beams of metal groaned, and chunks of debris fell away. Water flooded into newly formed fissures, creating powerful currents that ripped through the corridors. At last, the Mirage burst out of the warship's side through a crumpled aperture, colliding with a swirl of silt and debris. Fragments of the ancient vessel drifted in the gloom, inert. For a moment, all was chaos. The sub's hull groaned under the pressure, battered by waves of force from the collapsing structure. Then, a breath of calmer water. The sensors cleared, revealing the remains of the great warship sagging onto the trench floor, its once glowing hull now dim and lifeless. Nearby, Tal's subcraft drifted precariously, lights flickering. The commander managed to stabilize his vessel enough to glare at Alice and Marcus through the viewport, an unspoken promise that this was not over. But before he could renew the attack, another tremor shook the depths. Something in the warship's infrastructure gave way. A violent outpouring of water pressure sent a massive slab of metal careening into Tal's craft. With a final, vengeful glance, the Thralex commander was forced to break away, vanishing into the murk. It wasn't surrender so much as retreat, the mission compromised by the warship's collapse. Marcus exhaled, sagging in his seat. We did it. We actually stopped them. Alice's thoughts whirled. Stop them, for now, she added silently. Even if the rest of the submerged fleet remained dormant, the Thralex had proven themselves a relentless foe. She couldn't shake the certainty that Tal would be back. Yet at that moment, as the sub ascended from the flooded wreckage, a note of hope rang through her exhaustion. They had prevented the immediate threat. Humanity would have time to learn from this near catastrophe, time to prepare. The Mirage rose higher, passing the trench's rim. Outside, the ocean glowed with intermittent flashes of lightning from the raging storm above. When they finally surfaced near the battered remains of the Florida Keys, monstrous waves and shrieking winds lashed at the sub, but they managed to find a stable vantage to signal Horizon Station. Relief washed over Alice as she heard Rhea Samuel's voice crackle through the battered comms. Mirage, we see you on sonar. Thank God. The station's still standing, barely. Come in before the storm rips you apart. As they navigated back to the safety of the station's docking platform, the swirling clouds overhead began to disperse, and the first sliver of sunlight pierced the storm's edge. Smoke and steam rose from damaged compartments around Horizon Station, but the structure was still intact. Crew members rushed to help moor the sub, their faces streaked with relief and exhaustion. Dr. Alice Kincaid emerged onto the damp platform, salt water dripping from her hair. Marcus followed, the EMP's activation switch still clutched in his shaking hand. In that instant, the tension of the past hours settled into shared, stunned triumph. They had survived. Inside the station, they found rooms flooding, electrical panels shredded, and exhausted colleagues who had fought their own battles against infiltration and sabotage. Yet, in every corridor, there was an undercurrent of defiance, the determination of people who had faced a threat beyond imagining and lived to tell the tale. Gathered in the main control room, Alice, Marcus, Rhea, and the others assessed the damage. Repairs would be long and arduous, but the alien infiltration had ceased, presumably thanks to the disruptor that crippled the warship. For now, at least, Earth's ocean floor was safe from Tal's ambition. In the midst of the chaos, Alice found a quiet corner to catch her breath. A memory flickered through her mind. Her father's journal, the starry-eyed notes he'd scrawled about the ocean's hidden wonders. If only he could see how far she'd come, and how close they'd come to losing everything. A part of her mourned anew for the father she'd never truly known, but another part felt a sense of completion. She had faced the same dangerous secrets he had once glimpsed, and she had lived to ensure they wouldn't destroy humanity. Outside, the storm raged on, though it began to wane, its thunder receding into the distance. No one could say for certain whether the Thralex would return with greater force, or if the hidden fleet still held more secrets waiting to be discovered. For now, Horizon Station and the battered Earth beneath the waves could claim a tenuous victory. Looking at Marcus and Rhea, Alice allowed herself a weary smile. The day had been won, if only just. Tomorrow's battles would have to wait.